At the spring brunch, my older brother mocked me in front of everyone, saying not everyone understands real logistics. Then Grandma turned to me and said, "Is that why your firm just acquired his and closed his office?" The entire table silent. Spring brunches at my family's estate were always something out of a lifestyle magazine. Wrought iron furniture, white parasols, champagne glasses sweating in the sun. Everything felt like it had been staged for someone else's idea of perfection. I used to dread these things, but this year was different. This year, I had a secret. My name is Marcus. I'm 36 years old and live in Atlanta, though I was raised just outside Savannah, on the kind of land that makes you say the word estate instead of house. My parents host this equestrian-themed brunch every spring. It's a whole production, horse-drawn carriages for show, bourbon tastings for the uncles, and passive-aggressive family conversations in every corner of the lawn. Victor, my older brother, was already in rare form when I arrived. He was standing near the mimosa bar with a small group of relatives, wearing one of his signature linen blazers and holding court like some Southern Gatsby. As I stepped onto the flagstone patio, I could hear his voice float over the classical music. "There he is," Victor said, flashing that polished smile of his. "Marcus the Magnificent. Still managing boxes, or have they promoted you to clipboard supervisor?" A few of our cousins chuckled politely. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. "Same job," I said. "Still keeping the real world running." Victor leaned in, just enough to be heard. "A world of cardboard and spreadsheets. You must be so creatively fulfilled." I ignored the bait and grabbed a drink from the nearest tray. Victor always did this, painted himself as the visionary architect while casting me as the utility man. To him, my work in logistics consulting was a running joke. "You know what they say," Victor continued, turning to the group. "Some of us build dreams. Others, well, someone has to count the inventory." I forced a tight smile. "Good to know your charm's still structurally sound." That got a few stifled laughs. Victor just raised an eyebrow, pleased with himself. And then, like a breeze cutting through the heat, our grandmother Eleanor spoke up from behind us. "Is that why Marcus's firm just acquired yours?" Silence. Victor blinked. "What?" Eleanor didn't even look up from her plate as she dabbed her napkin. "I read the filings last week. You really should pay more attention, dear. It seems Marcus is your new boss, in a manner of speaking." I looked down to hide the smirk crawling up my face. Victor's jaw tensed. "That's not, it's a merger. A partnership, really." "No," I said, turning to him calmly. "It was an acquisition." The table went completely still. Even the music seemed to quiet down. You could practically hear Victor's confidence deflate like a souffle in the oven. "Well," Eleanor said, lifting her teacup, "to the new order of things." Victor didn't say another word. For the rest of the brunch, he picked at his food, avoiding eye contact while everyone tried not to stare. And me? I just sipped my mimosa and let the silence do the work. After the brunch, I took the long way home. Drove past the old train yards outside Augusta, the same ones I used to pass on my way to my first job in logistics. I needed the quiet, the time to let it all settle. Victor's face when Eleanor mentioned the acquisition. I'd been waiting a long time for that moment. Not to humiliate him, just to stop feeling like I had to explain myself. I kept thinking about what he'd said, about not creating anything real. And it hit me how little he knew about what I actually do. The truth is, I've been building something all along. It just doesn't come with glossy magazine spreads or architectural digest interviews. My work doesn't photograph well. You can't pose in front of a warehouse system or cut a ribbon at a new international supply chain hub. But that doesn't make it any less real. For the past 15 years, I've been the guy companies call when their operations fall apart. Broken inventory systems. Delayed shipments bleeding cash. Warehouses stuffed to the ceiling with unscanned product. I was the guy who showed up quietly, asked the right questions, and overhauled everything behind the scenes. Victor was designing boutique hotels in Miami and Dubai. His name was on the lobby wall, sure. But behind the scenes? His firm was bleeding money. Overextended. More ambition than stability. I remember the first time his company's name showed up on my desk. About a year ago, my firm, the one Victor calls a clipboard factory, started looking at potential acquisitions. Mid-sized firms in distress with high brand value. His firm ticked every box. The moment I saw the books, I recognized the signs. Too much runway spent on showpiece projects, not enough on infrastructure. I didn't say a word. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't even tell my firm's board that the company belonged to my brother, not until the ink was dry. It wasn't personal. It was math. I spent weeks combing through Victor's balance sheets. I knew the exact day his firm stopped making payroll without bridge loans. I saw the vendors he kept delaying and the line items where he'd cut staff to keep up appearances. What struck me wasn't how messy it was. It was how familiar it all felt. Victor had always been about surface, style over substance. He thought leadership meant charm and charisma, that people like me were support staff, necessary but unremarkable. He used to joke that I was just a planner. No vision. That I was too careful, too quiet. That I didn't take risks. Funny thing about logistics, you get real comfortable being underestimated. You learn to move in silence. You learn that the best systems are the ones nobody notices because they just work. When the acquisition was finalized, I didn't ask for a press release. I didn't schedule a family announcement. I let it land the way my whole career had. Quietly, precisely, without fanfare. And yet, the look on Victor's face when Eleanor dropped the news, that was more satisfying than any headline. Because for the first time, he saw it. He saw me, not just as his brother, not as the family's dependable background character, but as the man who just bought his company out from under him, without needing to say a single word. Victor didn't reach out after the brunch. Not a text. Not a passive-aggressive email. Nothing. I wasn't surprised. Humiliation wasn't something he wore well. For a guy who spent his career being interviewed in leather armchairs for design magazines, silence was his only way to save face. It was my mother who broke the stillness. She called 2 days after the brunch, her voice low and measured, like she was trying hard to sound neutral. I could tell she was pacing. She always did that when she was upset, but trying not to show it. I just wanted to check in, she said. See how you're holding up after the brunch situation. I let the silence sit for a beat too long. I'm fine. She hesitated. Victor's been quiet. I think he's embarrassed. You could have warned him, Marcus. I pinched the bridge of my nose. Warned him about what? That my company bought his. Well, yes. It looked like you were trying to embarrass him. I laughed, but it wasn't funny. Mom, I didn't say a word. That was all Eleanor. And it was the truth. She sighed. You know how he is. He's always been sensitive. I nearly dropped the phone. Sensitive? Victor had spent 2 decades cutting me down at family functions, mocking my job like it was a cute hobby. And I'm the one who's gone too far? I'm not going to apologize for doing my job, I said calmly. And I'm done pretending that him belittling me in front of everyone is just some harmless quirk. She didn't argue, but she didn't agree either. She just said, well, I hope you boys can sort this out, and hung up. 3 weeks passed. Then one morning, buried between work emails, I saw his name in my inbox. The subject line was simple, career transition guidance. I opened it. Marcus, I've had some time to reflect. I'm trying to reframe where I go from here. If you're open to it, I'd appreciate a conversation about what's next, how to pivot, where I can be of value. I could use some perspective. Victor, no bluster, no ego, just a man looking for help. We met at a French patisserie downtown, one of those places with marble counters and gold-plated sugar tongs. He was already there when I arrived, seated near the window in a pressed button-down. No blazer this time. No entourage. Hey, he said quietly as I sat. Hey. He looked thinner, like someone had turned down his brightness. His hair wasn't as carefully styled, and his hands, normally pristine, were gripping his coffee like it was anchoring him. I'm not going to pretend that wasn't a rough day, he said. I nodded. He looked out the window for a second. How did you do it? Do what? He met my eyes. Build something like this. Something real. There was no sarcasm in his voice. No smirk. Just a brother who had finally started asking the right questions. We sat there for a while, the hum of espresso machines and clinking plates filling the space between our words. Victor wasn't trying to dominate the conversation for once. He wasn't performing. He was listening. I always thought success was about momentum, he said eventually. About pushing the vision forward. Being seen. He sipped his coffee and glanced at me. But you built something while staying invisible. That's impressive. I didn't reply right away. I just stirred a bit of cream into my coffee. It's not about being invisible, I said. It's about consistency. Systems. Trust. You build one thing, get it working, then build the next. No headlines. Just quiet wins. He nodded slowly, absorbing it. I thought I had to sell the dream. Turns out, I was just borrowing time. That's the difference, I said. You built the brand. I built the engine behind it. Victor stared at his empty cup, his fingers tracing the rim. So what now? He asked. Do I even have a place in your company? I sat back. This was the moment. The one I knew would come as soon as I saw his email. I had rehearsed what I'd say, and I meant every word. There's a place for talent, I said. But not for shortcuts. His brow furrowed slightly. If you want to join the company, you'll need to go through the formal process, I continued. Application. Interview. Portfolio review. Same as everyone else. He didn't flinch. He just nodded once. No special treatment? No nepotism, I said firmly. You'll get no favors from me. If you want to earn a role here, you have to actually earn it. He leaned back and let out a long breath. That's fair. I studied him. He looked genuinely humbled, not just beaten, but aware. And it wasn't just his tone. It was in how he sat, how he spoke, how he didn't try to salvage dignity through ego. There was still a flicker of the old Victor, but something had shifted. He stood and held out his hand. Thank you for meeting me. I shook it. You'll have to impress the hiring team. I'll try, he said. The right way this time. As he walked out of the cafe, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not pride, not vindication, but something quieter. Closure, maybe. Or the cautious beginning of a new kind of relationship. One built not on rivalry, but accountability. The message came exactly 8 days later. Subject line, strategic vision alignment opportunity. I almost didn't open it. Something about the phrasing set off a familiar alarm in my head, the kind that sounded like Victor in full self-promotion mode. But I clicked anyway. It was a proposal. 6 pages long. Attached as a PDF with a color-coded framework, buzzwords bolded like they were revolutionary. I read the first line and sighed. While Marcus's team has demonstrated strong tactical execution and operational discipline, there remains a glaring absence of big-picture vision and design-forward innovation. I leaned back in my chair, pinching the bridge of my nose. So much for humility. The document went on to frame Victor as the perfect candidate to infuse strategic creativity into what he described as a mechanistically competent but emotionally disconnected enterprise. In other words, he was the spark, the soul, the genius waiting to be unleashed. And I? Apparently, I was the guy who made sure the trains ran on time but couldn't see the tracks beyond next Tuesday. It was infuriating. Not just because he'd taken another shot at me, but because he had clearly learned nothing. The tone was polished, but the ego was right back where it used to be, front and center. The kicker? He ended it with a request for an executive leadership title. He even suggested we co-head a newly invented division called Creative Infrastructure Synergy. I didn't respond. I flagged the email to HR with a simple note. Please evaluate this application as you would any external candidate. No exceptions. Then I forwarded the entire chain to the senior leadership team, including the board. No commentary. Just the facts. I wasn't going to stoop to his level. I wasn't going to make it a family thing. If Victor wanted to rejoin the corporate world, he would do it on the same terms as everyone else. The company had policies for this exact reason, to protect against favoritism, to guard the hiring process from personal bias. And in that moment, policy became my best defense. I didn't yell. I didn't pick up the phone and demand an apology. I let the email speak for itself. Later that afternoon, HR pinged me. We'll be proceeding as standard. The tone of the application was noted. I just replied with a thumbs-up emoji. At home that night, I poured a drink and stared at the ceiling for a long while. Part of me had hoped, after our meeting at the patisserie, that something had shifted, that he'd actually listened. But no, the mask had slipped only long enough to get through the door. Then the old Victor came roaring back, wearing a fresh coat of corporate paint. Still, I wasn't angry. Not really. Because this time, I didn't have to lift a finger. All I had to do was stay still and let the system I'd built hold the line. It didn't take long for the backlash to land. 2 days after HR declined to proceed with Victor's application, my phone lit up with a call from my mother. I didn't even have to answer to know what it was about. I could already picture her pacing through her sunroom, voice trembling with controlled outrage. I answered anyway. Marcus, she said, skipping the hello. What are you doing to your brother? I leaned back in my office chair and stared at the ceiling. I'm following policy, Mom. Policy? He's your brother, she snapped. He said you embarrassed him, made him go through all this just to humiliate him. He submitted an application, I said calmly. HR handled it. I didn't do anything. You didn't stop it, either. You could have helped. You could have guided him. I laughed once, dryly. I already did. Over coffee. Remember? She went quiet, just for a beat. Then came the sigh, the disappointed, theatrical kind. Marcus, this is not how family treats family. No, Mom. This is exactly how family treats me, I said, my voice flat. I get mocked for years, called a clipboard carrier, ignored at dinners, and now the second I draw a line, I'm the bad guy. She didn't respond, so I kept going. Victor came at this with the same ego he's always had. He submitted a flashy, insulting pitch and expected a shortcut. If he wanted a real shot, he could have been honest, professional, maybe even humble. She tried a different tactic. He's struggling, Marcus. You know he's never been good with failure. He needs support. So do I said quietly. But I stopped expecting it a long time ago. There was silence on the line. Then, you're letting business ruin this family. No, I said, and this time my voice was steady, grounded. I'm refusing to let family ruin my business. I hung up before she could say anything else. Afterward, I stood at my window and watched the late spring rain drizzle down the glass. It should have made me feel guilty. It didn't. What I felt, more than anything, was relief. I was done playing the part of the quietly dependable one. Done giving out passes just because we shared blood. I'd always thought I had to earn their approval, to get Victor's respect, my mother's validation, some sense of place in their polished little version of success. But now, I didn't want it anymore. Because I finally saw it clearly. Their version of family only worked if I kept shrinking to fit their mold. And I was done shrinking. For the first time in years, I felt taller, steadier, like I had stepped out from under a shadow I hadn't even known was there. Victor eventually did what I thought he never would. He applied formally. No family name, no backdoor favors. Just a clean resume and a brief, professional cover letter addressed to our recruitment portal like any other candidate. I'll give him that much. He tried. But I also knew how this would go. HR scheduled him for a video interview with the design strategy team. I made it clear ahead of time that I wouldn't be involved in any step of the process. I didn't want his failure or success to be about me. A week later, I got a short email from our lead hiring manager. Thanks for giving us the heads up on this one. We're passing on Victor's application. It didn't go well. Later, over lunch, one of the interviewers gave me more detail. He had ideas, she said, picking at her salad. Big ones. But none of them were grounded in anything practical. He talked over everyone. Didn't ask a single question. Another added, it felt like a TED talk from someone who never read the brief. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. Honestly, the first interviewer added, he came off like he thought he was too good for the role. I thanked them for their time, told them they made the right call, and went back to my office. Closed the door. Sat for a while. Not because I was sad. Not even because I felt vindicated. Just tired. He could have changed. He'd shown a glimpse of it during that coffee meeting, sitting there, stripped of his usual armor. But when it came time to actually walk the path, he couldn't do it. He defaulted to the version of himself he had always relied on, the performer, the visionary, the loudest voice in the room. Only this time, the room wasn't buying it. HR sent him the standard rejection notice that afternoon. I stayed completely out of it. No commentary. No follow-up. He didn't call. Didn't email. He just disappeared. I heard through a cousin a month later that he'd gone freelance. Small-time consulting for boutique firms trying to stay trendy. No headlines. No speaking engagements. Just a man drifting in the background, no longer the center of any room. There was a time I might have taken pleasure in that. Not anymore. Because I had finally realized something. His downfall wasn't my victory. It was just the natural result of a system that no longer bent for charm. This time, merit had the final say. And I didn't have to lift a finger to make it happen. The next spring came around faster than I expected. The weather was the same as always, warm breeze, blue skies, the scent of fresh grass, and too much perfume hanging in the air. Same white linen tents, same string quartet, same gleaming horses prancing in a circle while distant cousins pretended to care. It was a mirror of the year before, only now, everything felt different. I had been promoted in February. Senior partner. It was a quiet announcement internally, but the kind that came with real weight. Bigger clients. Bigger decisions. No press, no party. Just a few lines in a memo and a nod from the executive board. That was enough for me. As I walked through the brunch crowd, nodding to aunts and exchanging firm handshakes with second cousins I barely remembered, I noticed the shift. People greeted me differently now. With curiosity, even respect. Some of them still didn't understand exactly what I did, but they understood power. And the balance had changed. Victor was there. He stood near the back garden, alone, swirling something in a glass he wasn't drinking. His clothes were nice but off-brand. No tailored suit, no designer cufflinks. Just a button-down and slacks that didn't quite fit like they used to. His hair was shorter. There were lines in his face that hadn't been there last spring. He looked like someone trying hard not to draw attention and failing by virtue of how much quieter he had become. I didn't approach him, but I didn't avoid him either. About an hour in, I slipped into the kitchen to refill my water and take a breather. I was checking my phone when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned. It was Victor. He didn't say anything at first. Just nodded once and leaned against the counter. Then, softly, I was an ass. I looked at him. The same face I'd grown up with, only older. More hollow around the edges. He didn't try to explain himself. Didn't dress it up. Thanks, he said. For not kicking me when I was down. I didn't say anything. I just nodded once and turned back to the sink. That was enough. We weren't going to hug it out. We weren't going to toast to some newfound brotherhood. But for the first time in years, there was no need to correct, defend, or compete. Just air between us. Clean air. As he turned to leave, our grandmother strolled into the kitchen, balancing a cake platter with steady hands. She caught Victor's eye, then mine, and gave a slow, knowing smile. Looks like we know who's really steering the ship now, she said, setting the cake down on the counter. Victor chuckled once, a real laugh, not one of his performative ones. Then he walked back out into the crowd. And I just stood there for a moment, letting the quiet sink in. I wasn't trying to win anymore. I already had.